Thank you, Marcus. I really feel like I would be remiss if I didn't express appreciation to Marcus and Joni for allowing me to be here today. It's been 11, 12 years, I think, since I was on the program, and I'm amazed at the way God has blessed Marcus and Joni. It astounds me, and it's so good to be with them. It really, really is. And I want to read the scripture in 2 Chronicles 7:1. When Solomon finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. I came home from Africa a few years ago. I guess it's been 10 or 12 now. And I was over excited about what God had done in the Crusades, and I couldn't understand. I got to questioning myself, and I said, God, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with America? How is it that we can go to a third world country and preach a simple gospel and hundreds of thousands will come to Christ? And I couldn't understand it, and I was upset with myself. I was in the prayer closet. I've never had God speak to me audibly, but I know when He's talking to me. He said, my sheep know my voice, and I know when God's talking to me. And the Lord spoke to me as clearly as I've ever had Him speak to me, and said, you've got to learn one more time to respect the holy things. And I was grieved in my spirit. I didn't understand it. And I know that God is a holy God, and I started thinking, and this message came to my spirit while I was contemplating those things. And I thought of Uzzah. If you'll remember Uzzah, the high priest, King David wanted to bring the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem, its rightful place. And he had made several attempts, and this time he would go with an ox-drawn cart. God had told them if they were going to move the ark as to how they would move it. But David was kind of like people of our day. He got in a hurry, and he wanted to do it quickly. So he took an ox-drawn cart that had never been used, an ox itself that had never pulled before. And they put the ark on the ox-drawn cart. And if you remember, God said, I'm going to dwell between the mercy seats, or between the cherubims on the mercy seat. And the Ark of the Covenant to the Israelites meant God is among us. They knew that if the Ark was there, God was there. So they started on a journey back into Jerusalem with the Ark. And you know the story. When Uzzah reached out to steady the Ark, about the time it was to fall, that they hit a bump in the road, Uzzah reached out to steady it. And all of you remember what happened. Dead. Graveyard dead. He did not know how to handle holy things, and yet God had already given them instructions in the Word as to how they were moved to the ark. The priests were to get on the four corners of the ark, and they would lift it on their shoulders, and they would take a number of steps. They would drop the ark, fall on their knees and pray and worship. They would pick it back up, and that's the way they were to move the ark. David became very wroth with God because of what happened to Uzzah. But he really had no right to be angry with God, because God had told him how to handle holy things. And yet, out of disrespect, not knowing, but out of disrespect, David put the ark on the cart and tried to move it. And that was not the plan of God. Do you remember Uzziah? Uzziah was a great king. He came to the throne when he was a young man. He must have been 9, 10 years old when he came to the throne in Israel. If you read the book of Kings, 1st and 2nd, and Chronicles, 1st and 2nd, sometimes you get weary. You think, oh, Lord, will anybody ever come to Israel who will do right? There seems to be a constant thread, and it always says something like this. And he did that was evil in the sight of God. He restored Baal worship, and he put the false gods and the false deities back in the high places. And finally Uzziah comes, and oh, it's a breath of fresh air. The people don't know what to think, because Uzziah restored temple worship. He tore down the gods of Baal. He did everything but one thing. He left the gods in the high places. And in those moments and in those times, if you remember, all the false deities were in the high places. I've been to Israel 21 times, and I've seen them, and I've seen where the false gods, where they worship them. Uzziah did everything that was right. He was honored. He was respected as king of Israel. They loved him. They revered him almost to the point of David himself. But a time would come in Uzziah's life when Uzziah began to think more highly of himself than he ought. And he said to himself, I'm going to burn incense in the temple. He knew it was not right. He was not of the lineage of the priesthood. And they tried to scream and shout at him, Uzziah, you don't have this right. You're not of the lineage of the priesthood. This is not the way God does things. But he was so determined, and he forsook the old paths. And he thought, I'll do as I please. I've become a god unto myself. And in those moments, he started into the temple to burn incense, with the priests screaming, don't profane the house of the Lord. Don't commit this heinous act that you're about to commit. But he went headlong. And when he started to light the incense, leprosy from his head to his toes, because he did not handle properly the holy things. And when you hear the story of Uzziah, the Bible said Uzziah died as a leper. He couldn't even set his feet on holy ground because he had not properly handled the holy things. He knew what to do, but he did not do it. And so oftentimes that's the case with you and I. We know the path, we just need to walk in it. Jesus himself, when he came to the porch of the temple, he took a cat of nine tails and began to drive them from the porch, screaming, you've made my Father's house a den of thieves. And if you'll remember the stories of that Old Testament, they could come to the temple, and for a price, they could buy a sacrifice. And I've read the stories in the Jewish book of Legends, and it's a great book. And the Jewish book of Legends tells the story of two men. One of them comes with a lamb without spot and without wrinkle. The other comes just after a casual day of shopping with his family. And he comes to the porch of the temple, and there for a price, he could purchase a sacrifice. He would buy a broken-winged pigeon, a broken-limbed lamb, and he would offer it to the priest. And when Jesus comes upon this scene, he's grieved in his spirit. Why would you do this? This is my Father's house. And he's grieved. And he takes the cord and makes a whip of it and begins to drive them from the porch of the temple. He screams as they're running. And can I tell you, the same goes for them. They did not handle properly the holy things. There are some things that God will not tolerate.